Hello and good evening. Tonight's programme is about electronic information, an aspect of the new technology which is forcing huge changes on some of our most staid institutions. Microlife commissioned Andrew Neil, editor of the Sunday Times and a leading advocate of the new technology, to investigate three industries under intense pressure to update themselves. Here's his report.
The commodity that matters today is electronic information. In feudal times, wealth came from the land. In the industrial age, the country grew rich on ships and steel, coal and railways. Now, fiber optic cables and satellite links are the railways of the information age. And they've turned information into an international commodity, which can be traded, sifted through and used anytime, anywhere. Computers and modern telecommunications are at the heart of this information revolution. And every bit as much as the railways did 150 years ago, they're transforming the way we do business. The floor of the stock exchange, the heart of British capitalism, where shares in our major companies are bought and sold, and where fortunes are made and lost. Before too long, however, this bustling place could become just another museum, not because Britain will have gone bust, but because trading in shares will have gone electronic. The information technology already exists to allow investors to use their computer terminals to buy and sell shares. Now, if that catches on, as it almost certainly will, there would be no real need for a stock exchange floor.
The business end of the stock exchange would then look like this: a stack of telecommunications links distributing information about shares around the country. Under pressure from the government to update itself, the stock exchange has designed SEAC, a computer network that will allow a broker outside the exchange to get price quotes. It will be introduced in October.
What he'll get on the new system is the whole market in front of him at a glance by just looking at the screen, and he will have a clear definition of what the price of a security is at the moment he's looking at it. So in this case, we've got an example here where the price of ICI is 632 to 4, which means that if you're selling shares for your client, you must get 632 or better for him. If you're going to buy for your client, you mustn't pay more than 634. Right now, if you want to find out what the prices are in the market, you have to go in and ask people. Here you can see at a glance what they are, and then you have cut out that price finding out mechanism, and you can just concentrate on the dealing side.
SEAC is an example of a value-added network, VAN for short. It's a collection of individual terminals which are all linked into a central computer. The computer contains a huge amount of information and the software to process that information at incredible speed. The networks which access these large computers can stretch right around the world on satellite links, and most are privately licensed. At the moment, SEAC is simply distributing share information, but its computer is capable of allowing brokers around the world actually to deal in shares from terminals in their own homes. At present, the stock exchange won't allow that, but it will have to change its rules if it doesn't want to be left behind. In London, Reuters are already demonstrating an American network which allows you to buy and sell stocks in New York. Paul Julius Reuters started his news agency in 1851 by exploiting the stockbroker's hunger for hard and fast information. He started out using carrier pigeons. But in July 1985, his successors finally bridged the gap between supplying information and dealing in stocks and shares themselves. They bought the rights to Instinet.
A dealer in stocks and shares requires news, information on prices. And the system we have introduced here is really a complete package. It enables the trader to look at prices in the world's markets and then to enter his orders on a computer terminal, so effectively replacing the traditional negotiation by telephone or by being physically on the stock market floor. So, shall we use the system to trade some Apple shares in the North American market? To do that, we call up the Apple display, and I see that, in fact, they're trading at the moment at $20.18, $20.25. That seems to me to be a good price. I think I'll buy a small number of shares of Apple. So I hit a single button, the buy button, and I enter my order, which will be 100 shares. And I want to buy them at market price. And then I hit a single button, which will transmit the order to the Internet computer. And the answer will come right back saying that I have bought 100 Apple shares at $20.25. Shall we sell the Apple shares now? And to do that, all I do is press the sell button and confirm the quantity of shares, which is 100 shares. And the price is to be at the market price. And again, I simply press the action button, and within 2 seconds, I get a confirmation at the top of the screen, which would also be printed out on a printer. And this tells me that I've sold these shares at $20.18. So in fact, I'm afraid I've lost 1/8 of a dollar per share. That is $12.50, I'm afraid.
The stock exchange is going to lose a lot more than $12.50 to systems like Instinet unless it allows brokers to use the latest technology. Otherwise, London's stock exchange will simply fall off the world's electronic information network. Even that most conservative of institutions, the English law, has had to come to terms with value-added networks. Roger Evans is a barrister, and he's about to do something that the new technology does better, quicker, and simpler. Roger is trying to find references to a particular case, but using the traditional system is no guarantee that he'll be able to find all the references he needs.
We tend to be asked to advise professionally on unusual or very narrow questions. And we've almost reached the point in certain areas of the law where we've reached the limits of how far paper can work. Now, behind me are a large number of examples of encyclopedias of specific topics of the law, which are basically loose-leaf books, which are serviced by additional pages to be put in about a dozen times a year. Judges and barristers are very sceptical about them, although they're invaluable, for the simple reason people don't always put the pages in correctly. It's a rather difficult task, but an utterly moronic one for the idle pupil when he's got nothing else to do. So, although they are extremely useful, we always wonder whether they're completely up to date or whether they've been filed accurately. Now, Lexis is marvelous for making absolutely certain, on a very narrow point, that there is nothing further by way of learning to be discovered.
Lexis is a networked legal database with a high-speed indexing system. It's provided by an American company from a mainframe in Ohio.
Now, we're searching for examples of people who've lost their hair in injury. Now, to do this on Lexis, we take the word hair and we search for when it appears within 10 of loss, which is one possibility, or drop, or fall. Now, having formulated that request, we press the button, and the first case, which is not available, as it's a transcript probably anywhere else, and we suddenly discover it's absolutely uninteresting to us, because it's a case involving a fall and a hairline fracture. That is one of the problems with Lexis. We've produced a cluster of words which come up in another context. So that's not relevant. Next case, please. Now, this one also, which appears to be otherwise unavailable, being on a transcript, 49-year-old lady caught her hair in a revolving drill, as a result of which her hair was torn from her head, leaving her 2/3 scalped. And she has a considerable amount of hair loss. And then we look to see what the judge awarded. PSLA, pain, suffering and loss of amenity damages, and she gets the miserable sum of £3,500. Lexis does two things. It enables us to get at fringe areas much more quickly, and it's quite likely they would have been overlooked before on a manual search, simply on the grounds it's not worth going to that degree of trouble. Or alternatively, and this is very useful from time to time, Lexis puts materials on the database straight from the court reporter's transcript, more quickly, more easily, which we can't get hold of otherwise at all.
The British legal system is the basis of the law of many other countries, so you'd think that a British-managed network consisting of all of UK law would be much in demand. Norman Nunn Price had such an idea and set up a database called Eurolex. Soon he had 375 subscribers. Then in 1985, Eurolex got into cash flow difficulties, and Lexis UK stepped in to buy it up. Nunn Price believes that Eurolex offered much that Lexis didn't.
We had certain specialities, particularly our European law collection, which was the best in the world in the English language. Certainly we covered the community law and also, to some extent, the laws of Western Europe. In addition, we had Scottish law, which also was unique to us, and I think fulfilled a real need there.
But Eurolex's database now lies in suspended animation here in Sunbury-on-Thames. Lexis's UK operation, after buying up Eurolex, simply closed it down, and so killed its only major European rival.
There are very few British databases of any description. Most of the databases that are commercially available are American, and the Americans, of course, do very well commercially out of this.
Inevitably, the main problem is that they have tremendous scale, because the US market is gigantic by the standards of the rest of the world. I mean, about 85% of all online usage takes place in the USA. And this does mean that they can build huge, powerful, profitable enterprises within the domestic market. We can't do that. We can only build a profitable operation by being international from day one. And we're talking in terms of millions. And unless you are prepared and are powerful enough and have the kind of funding that makes that possible, then you shouldn't be messing around in this industry, because it's an industry for strong, powerful organizations, I think.
So, although we exported British law across the world, we cannot exploit its potential as electronic information. But there are others with the foresight to do so, and when they see a good thing, they take it. For over 200 years, the bulk of the British public's information has been printed on sheets of paper in London's Fleet Street. But the national newspaper industry is painfully succumbing to the logic of electronic information, which needs fewer people to handle it, and eventually will not even need paper to carry it into our homes. The shape of things to come became clear when Eddy Shah announced his intention to publish a national, which, although edited in London, would be distributed electronically to printing works in Manchester, Birmingham and Heathrow, saving massively on printing and distribution costs.
The way Fleet Street is now, the writing must be on the wall.
Well, that's up to Fleet Street to change. I mean, you've got to remember, I didn't create the environment that Fleet Street finds itself in. It was there before I was born. All I'm doing is bring provincial technology that's been there for a long, long time into the national newspaper scene. And I think the big difference in the future, possibly, will be that whereas national newspapers today are looked on as Fleet Street, the future national newspaper won't be Fleet Street, but it'll be a very, I think, strong and sort of vibrant national newspaper scene where you can have, because of the low cost of production, you'll be able to produce daily sports papers, daily fashion papers, all sorts of papers, special interest group papers, which you can produce for very low break-evens, and maybe up to 60 or 70,000 copies a day. And once you've got that going, it'll produce a much more diverse press. It'll bring about a multiplicity of titles, and it'll have a much wider base of ownership as well. And I think that's the important thing.
Appropriately called Today, Shah's paper will be in colour and entirely composed on computer. The weather map, for example, after being created on this machine, will then be transmitted along a network to the 3 printing centres. No ink or paper is used until today hits the presses.
On a conventional paper, you'd have pencil and paper, and you'd start drawing. You'd probably find your pictures, and you might say, right, we'll put a decent picture there. We'll take this headline across 2 decks of, let's say, 48, 48. You draw it in like that, add in some headlines here. I think on this page you'd make it 48 across 4, and you'd write down your headlines and edit by guessing. Whereas on this machine, of course, just by the press of a button, then the story comes up in one screen and the column there. As I scroll down, the cursor follows where I am in the story. I can change it at any moment I want. There we have Olution. Let me just, for the sake of it, make it blue. Go back out, come down, and as I do that, the story goes on and on. And as I come to the end, here's the word, it tells me it fits. I then close that, press this button, and I come to the next story, open it, here we are, down I come. This tells me where I am in this copy. I change it if I want to, and so we go on, and I'm fitting. I've been to the States where machines like this are now in everyday use in many newspapers, many countries that I suppose we English would regard as backward in our bad moments. Some in the Middle East, Turkey, Greece, for instance, are using this sort of equipment and our colour equipment as a daily habit.
In real terms, I think apart from Turkey and Greece, the sort of technology we're going to be using is still not being used in the world, because although everything we're using that you see around you here is tried and tested, nobody's ever bolted the whole lot together in one go, which is what we've done. And I think that's going to be the difference. And I think we will be the most advanced newspaper in the world in the way it's produced when that happens.
You are still, at the end of the day, going to produce something that uses ink and newspaper.
Well, can I change you on that as well? Because I think that's changing as well. Because one of the things we've done a lot of research into is the biggest thing we found that put people off buying modern newspapers was the ink that comes off in their hands. So even new technology applies to that, because the way that we put the ink on through control by computers and the type of ink mixing with the paper we're using should in fact ensure that even the ink doesn't come off in your hands. So we are not just, what you see around you is not all that we're changing. We're actually also changing the way that we print newspapers, and I think that is a big change as well.
But it's now possible to produce a paper that doesn't use any ink or paper at all. It's delivered straight into its readers' homes by telephone line. Micronet produces 30,000 pages of news and information on computer technology, which is updated day and night. Its editor, Simon Darcy, introduced me to exactly 1/2 of his editorial staff.
Graphics on the database. I see. And also looks after the AI area, the artificial intelligence area.
That's 5th generation stuff.
That's right, yes, we try and cover as much as we can.
You keeping up with the Japanese?
Trying to.
It's not easy.
Can I introduce you to Sid Smith, who is Micronet's deputy editor?
I see. What are you working on this morning?
Well, I'm subbing an article actually that one of our freelancers put in from home.
Yeah.
And obviously before it goes public, we need to sub it. It's a very easy process for them to put it into their home micro in their back bedroom or wherever, but we need to check it before it goes out.
Does it need a lot of work?
It's not too badly written, actually.
I think we better hire him. Thanks. So you've got a total of almost 30,000 pages, and yet you only seem to have 4 or 5 people there putting it together.
That's right, yes. It is quite unique in the fact that a lot of the information that goes up onto the database comes from journalists working from home. So there are some 30 or 40 journalists who have specific areas of interest, and they can update the database from their own home using their own micros, very similar to the ones we have here.
So they never have to come near a news office in central London
No.
or Fleet Street?
No, it's all done down the telephone lines.
Micronet is a value-added network which runs on home terminals of the Prestel database. It's the next stage in the inevitable coming together of the new technology and the old journalistic skills of information gathering, a potential which even the latest pioneers don't completely appreciate.
You can't pick up a terminal and take it on the train with you. You can't go to the loo with it. You can't do the sort of, you can't cut out your favorite picture and look at it and keep it for a few days of a goal that was scored or a moment that you enjoyed. So I think newspapers will be around for a long, long time.
Long term, I see being able to program your computer with various names of journalists you particularly like, various sports that you're a habit of looking at, and being able to program your computer at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning to log on to a Prestel Micronet and then download very rapidly information which will then be printed out. So instead of sitting on the train in the morning with your Times, Guardian, Telegraph, whatever, you will have a printout with all your favourite journalists, your sports pages, cartoons.
You can make up your own newspaper.
You can make up your own newspaper.
The time is not so far away when stockbrokers, lawyers, and even newspaper publishers will all depend on computer networks to store, process, and deliver whatever information is their stock in trade. For these information industries, not being on such a computer network will soon mean not being in business at all. Britain cannot opt out of this information revolution. Computers and modern telecommunications are no respecters of national boundaries. If we don't develop computer networks, then somebody else somewhere will. The future of wealth and job creation in this country depends on Britain moving fast into electronic publishing now.
I've been joined now in the studio by Andrew Neil. Andrew, getting in and out of your office in Wapping, both tonight and last night, seemed quite a hazardous business. Isn't that too high a price to pay for new technology?
Well, I got here, and the paper will get to you on Sunday as well, so we're doing it. But it is a high price, and it's not a price that I wanted to have to pay. I think rather than regarding it as a high price, though, it's a comment on how difficult industrial and technological change is in Britain. It's very hard to innovate in this country. There is a tremendous resistance to change in itself, and change, especially if it's allied to new technology. Now, in our particular case right now at Times newspapers, that involves a blue-collar print union. But it's equally strong, I think, as the film brought out there, among professional middle-class people too. And I believe that it's one of the single most important reasons why this country's been in decline for 40 years.
Can we just look at some of the aspects you've treated in that film? Let's go back to the stock exchange. Surely the essence of an exchange is dealing. It's all right buying a small quantity of shares, you know, using a computer, but large quantity of shares, you don't know who's the seller and who's the buyer. They have to negotiate, look in each other's eyes, and I can't see that ever being done by a computer.
Well, to begin with, maybe not, and certainly when big deals are being done, personal contact will be important. And we did say on the film that they probably still like the stock exchange floor to have a good gossip. But individuals, shareholders, small savers right now who might be intimidated by the stock exchange and by the paraphernalia and professionalism of it, they might well want to use their terminals sitting at home instead of putting the money into a building society or the local savings bank, might well want to buy 100 Apple shares or any other kind. And the small saver will benefit from that access.
But how are you going to regulate them? At the present moment, the stock exchange is quite carefully self-regulated. Surely the individual shareholder, there could be a lot of cheating and funny business going on.
There could be to begin with, but any new form of technology has to be regulated in some form. The difficulty is that the old guard don't regulate it in a way that tries to kill it off. You know what happened when the motor car was invented? The horse carriage trade got an act passed through Parliament saying you had to have a red flag, someone with a red flag walking in front of you doing no more than 4 miles an hour. That kind of regulation I'd be very suspicious of, but clearly we have to invent new rules, as the stock exchange is doing right now, simply to take advantage of the information technology. Rules are not a problem, they'll come all right.
But what's going to stop me from ordering 100,000 News International shares and not being able to pay for them when I have to?
Well, I'm glad that you've got the faith to continue to buy shares in our company because you realise it's a very profitable and progressive concern. Well, what will happen, I think, is that to stop that is that you might well have to press your credit card into the machine, and on the magnetic strip on the back of that, it'll read your credit rating, your credit worthiness, and stop you at a certain level. It may well be there'll be special credit cards for dealing in particular shares or in a particular part of the stock market. The one thing we find is that if there's a new technology that people want to take advantage of, they'll soon find ways around people cheating on it, which we wouldn't expect you to do for a moment.
Let's go to this, the law, because there seems to be a necessary job demarcation between solicitors and barristers, and there seems to be quite an overlap.
A bit like print unions, actually.
A bit like the print unions, absolutely right. Now, how is this access to information on legal cases and so on going to affect their jobs?
You mentioned the business of solicitors and barristers and how it's a bit like SOGAD and the NGA, except they've got slightly clipped Oxbridge accents and wear white shirts instead of print outfits. But it's the same principle.
Do you think they need an Andrew Neil to get in there and blow that apart?
Oh, I think dealing with Fleet Street's enough for one life for me. I leave the barristers to their own problems. But it is a difficulty, and I think that there are many things where right now you need a solicitor and a barrister that'll be done by a single status legal profession as time goes on. For example, if you're living in a little country town in England or Scotland or Wales somewhere, and you go to the local solicitor, what's to stop in future that local solicitor having the terminal that we saw on his desk and being able to call up the most sophisticated legal advice immediately without having to go to the local big town to get a barrister and get into his network? It'll decentralize and help the small man and should reduce the cost of legal advice.
One of the problems, of course, is that in the United States they've got 10 times as many lawyers and a lot more lawsuits, but the cost of establishing the database is the same. It's probably going to be quite expensive initially in Britain.
Yes, it will be expensive initially, as all these things do. You remember the cost of a colour television set when it came. Remember the cost of a TV set itself or a transistor radio. The experience with all these new technology innovations is that the real cost does fall. One way, of course, of sharing the cost is we think in very nationalistic terms. Even on the film that I made there, I was talking about creating a British legal database. What, though, what really could have stopped a British company putting American law onto its database and having American lawyers telecommute via their satellites into a database in London? I know a fire brigade in Sweden that uses the database of its towns with a computer based in Cincinnati in America. The new data networks that we're talking about are internationally transferable, and so we could be more international in our thinking.
Let's get on to the print business. I really take issue about having a computer print out my newspaper at home. I can buy a year's supply of the Sunday Times for £25. That's 10 years for one rather poor quality printer. I don't believe for 1 minute anybody's going to print out their newspaper at home. You can't be serious.
Well, you might be right, and I have to say that I have a nagging suspicion that you are. What I didn't want to be accused of, though, is because I'm sure as lawyers and stockbrokers and stock exchange people watch that film tonight about what I was saying about them, they're always shaking their heads and saying, that'll never happen. Doesn't he realize 50 reasons why it won't? So I didn't want to be accused of being narrow-minded when it comes to my own industry, of not taking that technological leap forward. It could happen, but it will be slow.
Doesn't it all assume a huge drop in actual cost to the end user?
Yes,
telecommunications?
it does. But the one thing we know from modern telecommunications is that the cost of using it falls dramatically.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Andrew. People who are used to doing a job in a certain way are often the last to see how it will be changed by information technology. Well, next week we'll be fathoming out what's meant by artificial intelligence, another growth area in information technology where Britain is in with a chance. And finally, yesterday, Sinclair launched the Spectrum 128K, which has been on sale in Spain for some months. You may like to know that we'll be taking a look at it in a fortnight's time. Until next week, good night.